Welcome, Annabel, to the podcast. Thank you so,
Oh,
so much for making the time for this. We're in very different time zones right now,
yeah,
but I so
absolutely.
appreciate it.
Oh, well, I'm so honored to be here, Cindy. I really am. It's a real blessing for me. So thank you so much.
Yeah, when we spoke, I felt almost like a kindred spirit type of connection, even though we're an ocean away from each other. And listening to your story and discovering some of your story from your website and what you've shared, I think that the listeners are going to get so much value. And I will say that there are going to be some tricky topics that we discuss, and so it's almost like a trigger warning, but I think these conversations, even though they might elicit certain fears, they're still important to discuss because when mothers share their experiences, so much magic happens, so many nuggets of wisdom get transmitted, and that's what I hold space for. And I'm excited for whoever is courageous enough to hear what we have to say, to see what unfolds today. So thank you again for coming on the podcast, Annabelle.
Well, you're so welcome. Thank you.
So I'd love to get started with this idea that conception can be ceremony.
Yes. So my eldest daughter, who will be 26 this year, was not planned. And so when I was looking to conceive my second daughter, I actually had to time her conception between my eldest daughter's two surgeries so that the surgeries fell in my mid trimester. I was at the least risk of either miscarrying or going into preterm labor due to the stress. We had kind of one shot at it. And I was already very deeply on my spiritual path by that point. And I really entered into it as a soul ceremony. So I created ritual space, and as we were conceiving, I was calling in the soul of my baby, and I'd been calling her in for many months up to that point, but I literally saw her, and I knew I had conceived. I knew, and I was very, very deeply blessed to conceive on that first attempt. And I continued in that vein throughout that pregnancy, and then also with the conception of my son, my third child. And I think connecting with the souls of my babies was so powerful because then what unfolded through their births and then later held a very deep, very profound meaning for me. And it also really helped me to come to terms with the challenges that I was going to face because I could keep drawing back really to what I call that soul perspective and seeing that our souls had chosen each other, that we had contracted to go on the journeys that we were going to share for a reason. And that belief helped me get through some of the darkest times until I was reborn back into the light and could look back and really honor the gifts that all those experiences had brought me. I really deeply honor the souls of my three children as my greatest teachers and the soul journey that they've led me on, because I would not be the woman I am today, or the teacher I am today, or the mother I am today without them. And it all began by connecting with their souls, with my eldest daughters during pregnancy, once I knew I was pregnant with her, and then with my other daughter and son, even before they came into my body.
I so love this idea of connecting with your child's soul before conception. And there is a remembrance there. For me, I feel like a part of me knows how to do that, you know? And so I
Yes.
feel like there is this ability in all mothers to be able to do that on some level, whether we're open to it or conscious of it or not. And I had Joel Schaefer on the podcast previously who talked about this idea from a Native American perspective, and they call it a shining, or yeah, a shining.
Mm.
And it's when the child puts a shining on the mother and then guides
Mm.
that mother to the father. And
Yes.
the mother will always find her way to the father, even if it's under less than ideal circumstances, because
Yeah.
this child, this soul, has chosen their contract, has chosen their obstacle course in a way throughout their life.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree. And that's absolutely what I believe. I so believe that the souls of our children choose us and their fathers. And you're absolutely right. Even if it's not on the surface ideal, it's because it needs to be that way for the lessons that need to be learned, as a soul on your journey.
I think this is a perfect segue for where I want to go with you, because one of the reasons that I felt this kind of kindred connection with you is because you've also experienced what single motherhood is like,
Yes.
and you've also experienced moving through addiction,
Mm.
and I've had to witness that on my partner's side.
Mm.
I don't know if words can really touch the depth of those experiences.
Mm.
When children are involved, it's humbling to think this is a part of their obstacle course. They also, on some level, chose this experience. And so for me, it
Mm.
lifts a lot of shame and it lifts a lot of the darkness, knowing that
Mm.
it might not seem like it right now, but this is what's gonna be a part of their story that makes them who they are,
Mm.
who they're going to
Mm.
be. And a part of my story is, how do I lead them through this? How do
Mm.
I show up in the darkness of whatever we're experiencing and
Mm.
alchemize it into the power of being a mother and the power of guiding my daughters through this world and through these experiences. And I'd like you to touch upon that journey, like it's the dark night of the soul, right?
Mm.
That we're moving
Mm.
through, and it can last days, it
Mm.
can last months, it can last years.
Mm.
And yet it is a necessary part of this alchemy that we are
Mm.
called to experience.
Absolutely. And I think the souls of our children come to us, well, definitely minded to take me to even greater depths of the dark night of the soul so that I could discover an even deeper level of strength, of courage, and self-love and the release of shame. So in my early 20s, I really battled with suicidal depression and addiction in response to trauma I had suffered as a child. And I was still really in it when I discovered I was pregnant with my daughter. And she literally came to me. I think part of our soul contract is that she saved me because she gave me a reason to live. And not only that, but as the second I knew I was pregnant with her, I began to nurture my body in a way that I couldn't do for myself. And during that pregnancy and then her birth, which was very traumatic, she was born with a very rare life-threatening syndrome and had to have open chest life-saving surgery when she was a day old. And then I spent the first 4 weeks of her life in intensive care with her. And then over the next 9 years, it must have been, I had to nurse her through a further 12 operations. And for the first 4 years, I really held it together. And she led me repeatedly on this deep, deep dark night of the soul. I call it the Sophionic descent and ascent of the soul. And then I became pregnant with my second daughter and gave birth to her. And that was immensely healing on so many levels because she was born healthy. And when you've experienced, I think, especially with your first child, a child who has so many medical issues and the level of nursing care was so intensive for so long, it really is such a miracle to give birth to a healthy baby who you can simply take home and breastfeed and be in the bliss. So, so my eldest daughter really took me on a very deep journey to find myself. And then my second daughter came in to really teach me about joy and ease and grace. However, when I stopped breastfeeding her, really the trauma that I had been through, not only sort of as a child and what I've been dealing with in my 20s, but the trauma of nursing my daughter through so many surgeries hit me. And I think it was a combination of my hormones shifting as I stopped breastfeeding, and I tumbled into what's known as post-traumatic depression, and which was probably also combined, of course, with postpartum depression. But I didn't feel I could stop because there was too much to hold. So I didn't reach out for help. And I was probably also in denial. I was probably scared that I was going to go back to that place. And I knew I couldn't because I knew I had to stay strong for my children. So I lapsed back into drinking alcohol, which had been my addiction in my 20s. And at first it was very controlled and, it didn't seem anything out of the ordinary. It sort of began by just going on holiday with a group of friends and us drinking beer at lunchtime, like you do when you're with a group of friends with all your children and you have a bottle of beer. But then when I came home from that holiday, I began to keep that daily drink up. And then one drink led to another, to another, to another, until I became a functioning alcoholic again. And you're absolutely right. I think one of the hardest things about alcohol addiction is the shame, and especially as a mother. And I think why I feel it's so important that actually I share this is that there are many mothers, and I know many, who do resort to alcohol or any other addictions to try to cope with what can be very challenging on our mothering journey. And I went through a very deep, dark night of the soul during that period. And it actually took me 18 months to get sober. And I became sober on my eldest daughter's 6th birthday. So I will be sober for 20 years this
Oh,
August
wow.
on her
Congratulations.
26th birthday. But what that journey really helped me to do in a different way was to find my inner strength to love myself. My eldest daughter, my journey with her took me to those depths of the dark night of the soul to find my strength for her. But the journey that really my second daughter catalyzed in me was going to the depths of forgiving myself and of loving myself enough to take care of myself, not just to take care of my children. I'm very grateful for that journey I went on. And I know it really was the making of me. And once I became sober, it opened up this incredible energetic space for creativity. And I wrote my book and I painted my healing womb art installation. And it really set me on my path of what I now do. It was a very challenging period. I was blessed in a way that my children were so young that they weren't aware. But I'm very honest and open with them about it. And I've always felt that's the best way with your children, to just be really honest and open and release any shame, but use your experiences to help guide them. So if I ever spot my now two adult daughters, lapsing into any sort of minor addictive patterns of behavior, like with caffeine or anything, I'm straight on them and I'm like holding up the mirror. But you have to go to those places yourself to be able to recognize that and help others from your experience.
Yeah, and what a gift it is to your kids that you've experienced all of that and then are able to offer some guidance and some wisdom from a very the only word that's coming to me is from a very deep place, right? Like you're able
Yeah.
to you've been in the void, you've been in that dark
Mm.
cave, and you can now offer some advice and guidance and not just words, but you like who you are now. You're who you are as a mother towards them is
Mm.
their guidance, is the gift that they get to experience because of what you've been through and how you navigated it. You're
Mm.
so blessed that you got out of that dark cave, got out of the void. Not everyone is lucky enough to do that. But you're
Yeah.
right. I think just having children, it gives you a different level of strength to move through those experiences and to
Mm.
come out the other side because there is this connection to your lineage. There is a connection to like what's been here before you and what's coming through you and will be here after you're gone. I felt that immediately when I got pregnant. I was like, all of a sudden, I felt this connection to like my mother on a deeper level, my grandmother, my great grandmother, who I've never met, just knowing I am a part of that lineage now.
Yeah.
It's definitely an anchor point that gets you
Yeah.
through some of those experiences. Thank you for sharing.
Absolutely. Not at all, love. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I hope if any, mothers listening are experiencing similar issues with addiction, to just know that they're not alone, and to seek help, but be also just be really kind and gentle with yourself and release that shame that is so implicit in it, that there's nothing wrong. You're not doing anything wrong. You just need support.
hmm I can't even count. I think it's every single podcast we talk about support, like how much support
Mm.
parents need, how much support mothers
Yeah.
need. It is so
Mm.
foundational and will get you through a lot of the challenges when you feel like
Mm.
hopeless or you feel like you can't do this anymore. You withstood the first 4 years like
Mm.
a
Mm.
marathon runner.
Yeah.
And after the 4 years, it's not over. You still have until they're 18.
Mm.
So it's like you need support no matter how strong you are, how resilient you think you are. And, the support is the community is what really gets us through a lot of those and
Yeah.
asking for help, which is a very vulnerable thing to do. But we need it. And
Mm.
if I could share personally, because my experience with addiction is more witnessing my partner, there is this like a longing for control. But I think
Mm.
motherhood is all about realizing that we have little to
Mm.
no control over this whole experience. And what
Mm.
comes through us is simply what we are called to navigate, and that's what catalyzes our growth and our evolution as
Mm.
mothers. But there's still that shame that you talk
Mm.
about, and lifting that is so important for our children so we don't pass it on, and we learn how to move through the shame and like meet our true selves.
Mm.
I think
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think the shame is a part of that process.
Yeah. And the shame is not ours. For anyone to have an addiction, it's because there's unhealed trauma there, and often abuse, neglect. And so the shame that their addicts are typically carrying is actually projected shame. from, you know, the situation, whatever trauma happened to them. It's not actually theirs to carry. I think what can really help is to see addiction as a way that the ego is trying to signal really to the self that the person needs to take time to heal. And and that's where it really becomes a recovery journey, really becomes a deep soul journey of loving yourself enough to want to heal whatever trauma is at the core of that addictive pattern of behavior, and to learn to deeply love your body and nurture your body. So much of my recovery journey was about my body. I started running in nature with my dog every day. I did belly dancing. I did Ashtanga yoga. I gave up all stimulants and I had a really nutritious diet. And it really was about learning to love my body inside and out
That's
instead of
so
punishing it.
yeah. I just wonder what is the catalyst that opens up the door to self-love for
Mm,
someone in a dark place. And and oftentimes it is our children, just knowing that
mm,
that is one reason, but there has to be a
mm,
deeper reason. You can't love your children if you don't love yourself. I think when I speak to more people, I'm like, "What is it that makes someone want to heal?"
mm.
Because like, it's not a lack of information, because we have so much information, we have so
Yeah.
many resources.
Mm,
I'm so curious, what is the thing that makes someone
mm,
be like, I'm gonna look under the hood. I'm gonna,
mm,
instead of putting things under this rug, I'm gonna look at what's under
mm.
there and deal with it." I'm so curious
Yeah,
what that thing is.
yeah.
And I think it's different for everyone, and that's why everyone's journey is a
Mm,
little bit different. But I'd love for you
mm,
to elaborate on this, like, motherhood journey where there are rites of passage that
mm,
we go through. There are initiations that we go through to get in touch with our power and who we really are and return home to ourselves. Yeah, because we've kind of lost that context in our culture,
mm,
but I
mm.
think it's really helpful when we return to some kind of ritual in a way to guide our journey.
And I think it goes back to like where we started the conversation about the soul's journey and our soul's journey with the souls of our children. And for me, when I gave birth to my son Zach, 10 years after my eldest daughter, and I had had all extensive prenatal screening because of my daughter's condition. And so it was deeply shocking to give birth to him, and he was born with an even rarer life-threatening syndrome involving facial and oral paralysis. So he was born unable to breathe, feed, speak, or smile. And I remember I had such an intense labor with him. I went from 0 to 9.5 centimeters in a car in 25 minutes with no pain relief. And I was just channeling healing. And I had this incredible experience. I actually had this experience in each of my pregnancies I'm sorry, each of my births, when I got to the point where I didn't think I could cope with the level of pain anymore. I really had an out of body experience with each of them, but a deeply spiritual one. And with Zach, he was born in the midway point between Samhain and the winter solstice. And all I could see was the winter solstice sun, the Sun King. And I could feel this intense healing energy flowing through my hands. And I could feel no pain. It was extraordinary. And then we arrived at the hospital. And of course, I was then, they should have just left me to give birth in the car. But they started hauling me out and putting me in a wheelchair and trying to get me into the delivery suite, which actually kind of took me out of the very, very deep spiritual experience I was in. And it was a pretty traumatic labor in that I had a very abusive midwife who I actually had to fire at 9.5 centimeters dilated on my own and demand another midwife come in. Then there was meconium. And at that point, they had the straps around my belly. And of course, every time I had this incredibly powerful contraction, it was excruciating. And I could not control myself from ripping the bands off. And at one point, they said to me, I couldn't believe it looking back. They said, if you do that one more time, we're going to pin your arms down. It's just like every fantasy you have about having a really holistic, gentle water birth. It was awful. Anyway, and he was born, and he was born obviously not breathing the same way my daughter had been. And so I was watching them resuscitate him. And I remember just thinking, no, this cannot be happening again. Because it was a literal deja vu to watching my daughter being resuscitated. And then I just felt this intense, like, wave come over me of complete calmness. And I just heard this voice deep within me say, it's okay. I know this. I've done this. And it was so profound. And it's not to say that I didn't journey a lot to a lot of dark nights of the soul over the coming years. But in that moment, I completely accepted the gift of my son. And I knew that however hard it was going to be, that we'd be okay. And he was in intensive care for 5 months. And we were then given the option that he could either go into a nursing home or we could be trained by intensive care nurses to nurse him at home. We chose that. And that was terrifying because we were resuscitating him under emergency conditions about 10 times a day. Everywhere we went, he had to legally have 2 adults with him at all times because his resuscitation needs were so intense. They wouldn't actually normally allow a child at that high risk to be at home. But I did insist, and I had nursed my daughter through 10 operations by that point. And I remember for the first 5 days being absolutely terrified, like terror. But my father was there, and I went into his room, and I remember crying in his arms and saying, I can't do this. I can't do this, Dad. What if I can't resuscitate him and he dies and it's my fault and I have to live with that for the rest of my life? And he was so amazing. And he just said to me, you can do it because you have to. And you will do it because you have the strength to. And he just said to me, just take each day, each hour, each moment as it comes, and you'll be fine. And he was absolutely right. And after 5 days, it was like a switch went off in my brain. And I guess it's how nurses and health professionals and paramedics function in the role that they do. But I never had another emotional response to him stopping breathing. And I mean, honestly, it got to the point where we had some really funny stories to tell. I remember we had literally like a mobile ambulance unit in the back of the car, so everywhere we went. And I remember doing the dreaded school shoe shop. I don't know if you have to do that in the States, but it's a nightmare. Like the week before they go back to school and all the parents hit the shoe shop. And I remember, so when he stopped breathing, we used to have to literally hurl him on the floor, get the suction machine out, suction his airway, and get him going again and get the oxygen on him. And my daughters were so clever, they'd cottoned onto this, especially she would have been 6.5, kind of 7 at that time. So she thought this would be the most opportune moment to try to persuade me to buy her this pair of pink spangly, sparkly trainers. So I'm there resuscitating my son on the floor. And she's there going, Mummy, can I have these? Can I have these? And I'm going, yes, whatever you want. And so there were, and that is key, is dark humor. One of the things that has got us through everything is that you have got to laugh. You have got to find the joy, even in the darkest moments. I mean, I couldn't even begin to describe the level of trauma as a family we've been through with my son. But one thing I was absolutely determined was that I couldn't stop it from detrimentally impacting my daughters or Zach himself. That was out of my control. But what I could do was ensure that I wove as many happy memories into their childhood as possible. And I kind of used to see it as just as holding the scales of balance. And all the traumatic times and all the, you know, the surgeries and everything. And he was on the bridge between life and death for years. So we were constantly facing that. And it was like that would get really weighed down on the scales. And I was like, right, well, I need to build this up here. And so we had dance parties every night in the kitchen. Whenever I could, I would just say, right, kids, get your bags, we're getting in the car, we're going on an adventure. And I would just drive them. And this is when I was a single mother as well. And I would just drive them to the beach, or I'd take them to a stone circle, because obviously I'm on my spiritual path, I'm obsessed with sacred sites. And it's really beautiful now to receive from my adult daughters who say, yeah, mum, it was traumatic. It was deeply traumatic. And they're obviously still moving through that trauma in their 20s. But they said, but it was also amazing. We had such an incredible time. And I just made it my mission to transform all the shadow experiences into light and to teach them that. Like I brought them up with the Gnostic myth of Sophia, to believe that every shadow experience is an opportunity to be reborn back into the light of greater strength, courage, compassion, love, wisdom. And they are so full of compassion because they've been there. They've been to the absolute depths from a very, very young age. I'm at the point now of motherhood. I'm be 26 years this year, where I'm able to look back and go, yeah, there were some like serious dark nights of the soul where I really didn't think I was going to come back. I really didn't think I had the strength to cope. But I always did. I always did. And every time you pick yourself up and you put one foot in front of the other, you go even deeper into your strength and your courage. And I think that for me is something that I feel is so important to share. If I could go back to that 20-year-old traumatized girl and say, you have no idea how strong you are. You have no idea what you are going to survive. And I think for me, that is my biggest message to all women, is you are so much stronger than you could ever imagine. And you will get through it. In those moments where, you know, you're on your knees on the floor and you're like, help me, like I cannot go anymore. And I think every mother hits that point, if it's sleep deprivation or whatever else is going on in their life. We all hit those moments of, I cannot cope anymore. And that was the point when I realized that I was never alone. Like for me, my faith and my spiritual path has been my greatest source of strength. And it's in those moments that instead of resisting whatever challenge was coming at me, that's when I began to start to surrender back. And I allowed who I feel is the divine mother or goddess or the feminine divine to hold me. And that's when I gave over the illusion of any power or control or strength I had. because it wasn't mine. It was about becoming an empty vessel for her to flow through me. She gave me the strength and she held me.
As you were saying that, like my body just landed. There's so much truth in that. Like, when you just feel in your body that there's a truth. And it's as if you're describing how I want to show women to approach the birth experience as an empty vessel. Something is coming through you to surrender and allow, to realize we don't really have control. That's an illusion.
Mm.
And that's where the magic happens. That's where these
Absolutely.
transformative birth experiences happen. And where you can have this spiritual experience that you were describing in the car. If they would have just left you in the car. But every mother, no matter how amazing or, unfortunately traumatic some birth experiences are, after that, every mother, I think, does have those moments where you're on your knees and you're just like, not only can't I cope anymore, I don't even want to cope anymore.
Yeah.
And those are usually the times where you get in touch with something bigger than you, like a higher intelligence
Mm.
that you're just a part of. You're not separate from it.
Mm. Absolutely. I think it's so important to be really honest about the conflict. As mothers, it takes us, to the most shadow places in our emotions and the most light, ecstatic places. And I think it's really important to normalize that. I look back and there've been moments in my mothering where I've been driving home, say, from work, and I've just wanted to keep driving. I haven't wanted to go home because I knew what I was going to have to cope with when I got there. And I think every mother can relate to that. It's like this undying love for your children. And then also this, oh, I just need some space to myself. I just need to breathe. And I think what's so important is to be really honest about those conflicting feelings, because we need to be able to forgive ourselves as mothers for having those shadow feelings and thoughts around our children, around our mothering experience, because that's normal. That's life. I think it's important that we acknowledge that, and that, mothers aren't there alone beating themselves up for having these thoughts or feelings. And I think that is one of the issues of patriarchal society, and the segregation and the isolation that has happened to mothers. It then fuels that feeling that, oh, I'm the only one feeling this, or I'm the only one doing this, or whatever. And this is why I feel that podcasts like this, Cindy, are just so important, where mothers get to really talk and to listen to each other and to realize that they're not alone in whatever they're feeling. And I think that's a huge sense of comfort when you can normalize it for them.
Yeah, normalize it. And as you said, bring in that dark humor because it will
Yeah,
help you survive. I could not relate more when you were
totally.
when you were describing that. I was like, I have made some dark jokes in my time.
Totally. It's the only thing that has got me through. I remember when my son was in intensive care, and the nurse, I remember a nurse once saying to me, "What is wrong with you? You never stop laughing." And I'm like, my God, you got to laugh. Otherwise, I'm just going to be a complete heap on the floor, sobbing. So
Totally.
yeah, dark humor all the way.
Yes, after so much of my life changed, like literally my life just flipped upside down. I couldn't I had hardly any time to watch TV or movies anyways, but I couldn't watch anything except stand-up comedy. I was like, Bring the jokers in. This is all I can tolerate right now. Nothing remotely dramatic or dark. Like, I used to love that show Black Mirror before having my kids, and then after that, I was like, "No, I just need the humor, bring it in." And there were times when I would joke around, and I've written news articles about this, about putting my kids in the compost because it was just so much, and it was a joke, it was a dark joke. But, like, the people around me who were asking, like, "How's motherhood? How's the kids?" They got a gist for what it was like at that time. And I could feel things getting, like, more manageable in mind and heart and my body because I don't make the same level of dark jokes anymore. My jokes are a little more light these days. But it gets you through those dark times. 'Cause it's true,
It
if you don't
does.
laugh, you are just gonna be a heap of bones on the floor.
Totally, totally. I mean, it's definitely one of the things that's got us through it. And you just can't, it's like obviously, you know, the traumas we've been through, and I'm sure your listeners have their own versions of those, you know, they're deep, dark places, but we can't dwell in there. Otherwise, we'd never survive. There has to be fun and joy and laughter woven in through it all. And I think, yes, I've always really believed this as a therapist, actually. And just from my experience with my children, is that yes, you need to go into those dark places. You need to do your healing work. You need to, I mean, I'm a kind of parts therapist, transpersonal therapist. So I work very deeply with all my inner parts and archetypes. And that's really important. But you don't want to get stuck there. Like Persephone doesn't remain in the underworld. You know, she's only there for 3 to 6 months, depending on which myth you read. But you've got to be reborn back into the light. And you've got to be in the joy and in the bliss and in your creative inspiration and expression. And it's the flowing between the two. And yeah, so important.
Yeah, I love that your book has the theme of the serpent because it's that undulating between the dark and the light, right?
Yeah.
And and for me, there's been this big theme about being able to shed your skin the same way that a serpent
Mm,
does, letting go of the ego
mm,
a little bit, letting go of your identity. It's uncomfortable, don't
mm,
wanna do it, but then
mm.
but then you evolve, then you grow. That's how a snake grows and evolves, is by shedding its skin.
Yeah.
And so there is in motherhood, there is this shedding of your old identity, and with every child,
Mhm,
shedding of, the family dynamic that used to be, because there's a new dynamic in
mhm,
place now. And throughout all
mhm,
of your challenges in life, like, it's this constant
mhm,
being reborn into the light. And I'd love
mhm,
to hear your take on the your capacity to go into the dark emotions, the heavy emotions, the grief, the
mhm,
pain, the heartache, the sorrow, the anger, the rage, all of
mhm,
that, to feel it in its totality. You're then able to feel joy and bliss and
mhm, mhm.
pleasure and connection also. It's like the same amount that you're able to go into the dark is also the
Yeah,
same capacity you have to go into the light. Do you know what I'm trying to say?
yeah. I think you're absolutely right, Telly. Yeah, completely. And that's really what my motherhood journey taught me to do, because I think addiction, how I was in my early 20s, is when you're stuck. You're stuck in the shadow and in the wound and in the trauma. But what my journey with my children taught me to do was to alchemize. And this is, you know, the myth of Sophia, goddess of wisdom, is that it is a spiral. It's a spiraling path. And I think you're absolutely right that the deeper depths that I've gone to in the shadow experiences, the more joy and bliss I've been able to experience. I remember coming out of intensive care after about 5 months, and one of my teachers coming to see me, and she said, "How are you?" And we just got home, and we were, you know, resuscitating him constantly. And I was in a state of bliss because I was home and my family were together. All my children were united. I was in a state of ecstasy that my son had survived. And so I remember saying to her, I am so grateful. I am so grateful. I am so grateful. He's alive. We're home. We're together. And I remember her saying to me, you're incredible, Annabel. Like, why? How can you be in a place of gratitude with what's just happened to you for a second time? And I looked and I remember just being really shocked looking at her and thinking, oh, because you have no concept of where we've been for the last 5 months in intensive care. And in contrast to that, this is literal heaven. So the perspective that the depth of the shadow places gives you is that something that someone else might take for absolute granted, just being able to be home with your children or your child being alive, becomes like this, you know, ecstatic experience. And that for me is the biggest gift of my experience with my children is the perspective. I've got so many memories like with my son where I remember it wasn't until he was about, I think he was 5 or 6 before he was able to just lay his head here because otherwise his airway used to close and he'd stop breathing. So he always had to have his head over my arm with his neck completely extended. And it seems like such a small thing. But for a mother, you're so used to holding your baby here or your toddler or your child and then resting their head here. And I'll never forget the first time I was lying in bed and he lay his head here and he didn't stop breathing. And I took a photo of it just for me and him. But that moment for me, I'd waited 6 years to have that, what would be seen as such a simple moment for most mothers. And what a gift is that? That is the gift that these tiny little moments that a lot of people take for granted. And that's because that's normal to take those for granted because, you know, they're everyday experiences. But the magic of having gone to those depths is that those little mundane moments become ecstatic and blissful. That's the biggest gift, I think, for all of us, because my children are the same. My daughters are the same. They have such a perspective on what's important, what's not important, and they find the joy in the moment. Mm.
Wow, what a gift to offer to your children through this experience. I haven't experienced what you've experienced, but I echo that. Like, just knowing that my daughters are home and safe,
Mm.
like, I just relish in that.
Mm.
It's a
Mm.
very basic thing, but
Mm.
the amount of gratitude and the depth of gratitude that you can
Mm.
experience, that you can embody is it's better than
Mm.
anything that like, it's heaven the way that you described it as
Mm.
well, like, there
Mm.
there is heaven on earth, and it's through these little moments when you have
Mm.
that contrast because 'cause you've experienced not knowing that or not having that, and you have the contrast where
Mm.
you're like, "Oh my god, this is so precious," right?
Mm.
So much of meditation and mindfulness and spiritual practices, I think, are attempting to bring us to that space, to that present
Mm.
moment
Mm. Mm.
where gratitude for everything, even our breath,
Mm.
is at the
Mm.
forefront. These very dark experiences, I think, just amplify our ability to
Mm.
go there and our ability to have that in every little moment as a mother. So it's really beautiful that,
Mm.
you
Mm.
have the courage to go to the depths of the dark night of the soul, and the reward on the other side is this
Mm.
bliss in your everyday
Mm.
life. Yeah, there is a reward. There is there is something on the other side. And I think it's important for
Mm,
anyone who might be listening right now, who might be like struggling, who might be in the depths of the
mm,
dark right
mm,
now, to know that when you have the courage to move through, to ask for help, to keep putting one foot in front of the other when
mm.
sometimes that's the only thing you can do, there is something on the other side that is so fulfilling and so enriching, and it's a beautiful thing when you
Yeah,
get there.
absolutely. It is. And I think for any mother who is struggling, is the thing I learned is to stop resisting, because our ego will try to fight the struggle and try to resist. And the more we resist, the harder it is. But if we accept in that moment how we're feeling and how tough the challenge maybe is, and we rest back into whatever faith you have or reach out for support from loved ones and surrender in the absolute knowledge that there will come a point where you will be reborn from that dark night of the soul or from that challenging moment, that life will get easier. Life will. And it's not to say that it won't become challenging again at any point, but when it does, you have all that wisdom and experience and courage and strength carrying with you. And I think coming into the present moment can be really powerful when you're feeling that level of overwhelm or despair or exhaustion or whatever you're experiencing as a mother, is to come back to the breath. You take some really deep breaths and be in the moment and just be so grateful for cuddling your baby or whatever you're doing in that moment, because that's all that matters. All that matters is that you and the people you love and your children are safe and well. And anything else that you're worrying about actually isn't important. And if we can keep bringing ourselves back to that, we take a lot of pressure off ourselves. And if we try to live more moment to moment like that, then I think it helps to bring a sense of peace, especially as a mother, when, there can be so much chaos rolling, or, whirling around you. But if you can keep coming back to that still point within you, then that's what will help see you through the challenging times.
Yeah, the visual of chaos whirling around is, I think, what mothers can all relate to, because it is like, how can you get to the eye of the storm? There's chaos all around you and you're centered. There's
Mm,
calm. And
mm,
it's it's a practice, it's a skill, but it does require, I think, support and just faith that
mm.
like you can get through this moment even when it feels too overwhelming or just too much. And support is a big thing,
It's
obviously.
huge.
Yeah.
It's so huge. And it's so, I mean, I couldn't have got through those early years as a mother without the support of family and my close friends who lived in the same village. And I met them all at the mother and toddlers group when I was a very young 26-year-old mum. And I remember feeling so nervous, and they became my lifelong friends, and all our children grew up together. And that support from other mums and is just so important. And yeah, I would really deeply recommend to any mother who's feeling any sense of isolation to find the courage and to go to something in her neighborhood or locality where she can meet other mothers.
Absolutely. It's this process of revillaging.
Absolutely.
So
Mm.
important. Before we head off, I have one last question that I wanted to ask you, but I did want to touch upon, you mentioned to me that I think it's important to have structure and routine to create
mm,
time for self in the post-pregnancy, postpartum
mm,
era. And for you, obviously that looked a little bit different because you were navigating so many big challenges.
mm,
But for most mothers, what is something that they can kind of use as an anchor point? Like I brought in the
mm,
word ritual at the beginning of the podcast because I think it sets up our day in a
mm,
certain way, and it brings a level of intention to our day.
mm,
So I'm
mm,
curious, what would be, if you were to give any kind of advice, what would be something
mm,
that women can use as an anchor point to
mm,
create that structure or that routine?
mm. I was sort of forced into it by circumstance in that I was a single mother with my eldest daughter. And I knew I was going to go under if I didn't get her into a routine. And this is 26 years ago. So the book that I used was the Contented Little Baby book. I think it's still out there now, but it was my lifesaver. And it took me 3 weeks to get her into this routine. I think I did it when she was 4 months, but I never looked back. She slept through the night. She had a 2 hour nap every lunchtime and her mid morning nap and mid afternoon nap. And that liberated me completely because I always knew that for half an hour in the morning, 2 hours at lunchtime, and half an hour mid afternoon, I had time for myself. And sometimes I just wanted to sleep, but that was great because I was able to sleep. But as time went on and I didn't need the sleep so much, I began to create in that time. And I was so disciplined. So it took me 9 years, but I wrote my historical novel, The Serpent's Tail, in my children's nap times. I had 2 year break after my second daughter when I was going through addiction recovery. But it took me that 9 year period, and I was so disciplined. The second I put them down for their naps, I went into my study, I switched off my phone, I didn't do anything other than write. And it was the same after SAC. I actually painted my way from anger, rage, all the way back to compassion through painting my art installation, The Healing Womb, which again I did when he was sleeping. So I know a lot of mothers don't like to put their children in routines. But for me, what I have learned is that if you create the structure and the safe container through routine, your children know what they're doing. My experience is they're a lot happier because they know what they're doing. They know when they're going to be fed, watered, sleep, play, and it completely liberates the mother to do what she wants to do in that time, whether it's she wants to have a bath and relax, or she wants to work out and, strengthen her body again, or does she want to do something creative like writing or playing music or whatever it is that fills your soul. But that for me is so important. And actually, after my second daughter was born, I did a 9 month meditation course. And I meditated 3 times a day when she had her 3 naps and journaled. And that was incredible experience. And again, I was very disciplined about it. And I'm an innate addict. Discipline does not come easy to me. But I realized as a mother that the only way I was going to liberate my time to be in my creative flow and my spiritual flow was to create structure and routine. So if you can, I've really, just from my own personal experience, because I know every mother is so different, how they like to lead their life and bring up their children. But for my own experience, that's what really worked for me.
I like how you described just something, it doesn't matter what that thing is, that is just for you. And because in the postpartum period, it's so much all about the baby. and you kind of
Mm,
lose yourself a little bit, but something that is
mm,
soul nourishing, something that can bring you back to yourself, something that can elicit some creativity, no matter what that thing is
mm.
it'll help you be a more joyful mother as well. You won't feel as depleted.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's really calling on help, whether it's from your partner or husband, or if you're a single mom like I was for many of my years, calling on family, friends. I remember when I was a working mom before I set up my own company in 2009 and I was employed, there was a bunch of us school mums and we couldn't afford childcare at that time. We used to have each other's children on our days off. And it just worked really well. And the kids loved it because, I mean, the only issue was on your day off, you were looking after 8 children. But the kids loved it, and we all mucked in together and we all really helped each other.
Mm.
Yeah.
And that enriches your life and it enriches your children's life so much more. I've found that as well. The more I've been forced in a lot of ways to lean on community, it's brought so much love and fulfillment into my life and into my children's life. And then
Mm,
they see you, you're modeling asking for help and
mm,
reaching out.
absolutely.
So as they go through
Absolutely.
their life, they're gonna be like, yeah, that's just what you do. When you need help, you ask for it. It's like so simple. So
Yeah,
it's a beautiful thing.
completely. It is. It's
I will be mad at myself if I don't ask you this question before we head off.
the
So,
final one.
yeah, it's not even the final one. I'm gonna try and do this quick. Okay, because you are someone who has gone through this journey and understood how to alchemize what's happening in your life into what you desire, and you've experienced 3 births, I want your take on what you see happening in the like on the motherhood journey from preconception to postpartum as in regards to our power as women. And I'm coming at this from the perspective of there is support for sure, but we get lost in the cracks of the system often.
Mm,
The process is often disturbed.
mm,
Like when you described you got into that space in the car and you're like, "Ah, they should have
mm,
just left me in the car," right? I feel like that
mm,
happens often, like there's a
mm,
disturbance for when moms are going to have this incredible
mm,
experience or like even preventing that from happening in a lot of ways just because of how the system works. There's no I'm not
mm,
blaming
mm,
anything, but I think there is a potential to meet your power in the birth
mm,
experience, in the labor
mm,
experience. And in a
mm,
lot of ways, what I see is that being inverted.
mm.
Yeah, so I'd love your take on it. I would be mad at myself if I
Yeah.
didn't ask you this.
Okay. Okay. I love this question. I love this question because it gets my warrior wise woman really fired up. Because the
Yes.
26-year-old me who gave birth the first time and was still really a child, I was still really in my own maiden trauma. I didn't have a clue. And in that first labor, I wasn't trusting my body. I was giving over all my power to the medics. And I'd finally been given an epidural because it was a very long and painful labor. And the midwife had her back to me and she was writing down her notes. She said, without even looking around, she goes, "Oh, will you stop moaning? You're not in pain. You've got an epidural." And I went, "But I am. I'm in agony." "No, you're not. Shut up." Literally like that. And then my partner looked down at the floor and the epidural had fallen out of my spine. So I was fully experiencing my labor pains. And she literally just picked it up off the floor and stuffed it back in my back without even cleaning it. So that was sort of the beginning of my experience. And by my second daughter, I guess by that point, I had nursed my daughter through so many operations. And that had really helped me to find my power because I was fighting for her. And in our NHS system here, I know that both my children born with life-threatening syndromes would have died if I hadn't fought so hard for them. I mean, I was fighting like a mama wolf. And so with my eldest daughter, I think it was by the time of her third surgery probably, I refused to allow any medics to put any lines in her until I had personally given her the anesthetic gas and handed her unconscious body over to the anaesthetist. And I'll never forget that moment of, and that does take a lot of strength to do that with your own child. Because I would take her on a meditation whilst I was holding the gas over her, like swim. I always used to take her swimming with the dolphins in the ocean until she fell unconscious. And then I would literally hand over her body onto the operating table and say to the anaesthetist, now you can touch her. So I think by the time I gave birth 4 years later to my second daughter, I was really in my power around voicing myself. And so I went from having had this incredibly long labor with my first to having a 40-minute labor with my second. And the midwife didn't believe me. I said, so they induced me and I went into full-blown labor. So they were still trying to get me up to the delivery suite. And they put me on the bed and I was in full-on primal mode. And I instinctively went up to hold on to the bed to bear down backwards, which is the natural way to give birth. And she got me by my shoulder and she literally threw me back on the bed and said, you can't do that. It's too dangerous. And then I just went, she's coming. And she hadn't even examined me at this point. She goes, of course she's not. I said, she's coming. And I'm literally just going, she's coming. And the next thing I know, I mean, I didn't even have to push with my second daughter. She literally, there was one monumental contraction and she flew out of my body and she only just caught her. And I remember her turning around to the midwife assistant and saying, let that be a lesson. That's how quick it can be. And she was born so fast that her face was bruised for weeks. But, that was me just saying, I know my body. I've given birth. She is coming. I don't care what you think or what position I should give birth in. I'm telling you, I know my body and my baby is about to be born. And then by the time I gave birth to my third child, my son, as I explained, I mean, at 9.5 centimeters dilated with contractions literally coming like that, I was firing the midwife and telling her to get out of the room and demanding she get a new one in. And that is something I just really want to convey to mothers. I have a really deep, loving, compassionate, gentle side to me. And I have a complete fierce warrior side to me that has come from fighting for my children. And I remember my son's consultant in intensive care saying, you're so terrifying that when I see you, I walk down the corridor, I walk in the opposite direction. and I'm like, yeah, you better believe it, because if I feel that either but especially my children, are under threat, or they're being neglected in some way, or they're at risk, I am going to absolutely fight. And that has come from learning to trust my body, myself, my intuition. Don't ever, ever let a health practitioner dismiss your instinctive feelings about yourself or your child. You might be wrong. It might be a fear, but you know yourself best. You know your children best. No one can tell you otherwise. So my real advice is, if you ever have that intuitive feeling or that sense that something's not quite right, either with yourself, a loved one, your children, you absolutely have the power to voice that and to demand that your concerns are taken seriously. And I think so much of our mothering journey, all our mothering journeys, is about finding that strength and that power, not just to voice our needs, our concerns, but to trust them, to trust ourselves and trust that inner voice, because the mama knows best. And the best consultants and the best surgeons will say that. The ones who don't have an ego because they're so humble, because they're so confident in what they're doing, will always listen to the mother. It tends to be the health practitioners that are more at an SHO level who have the arrogance of youth, who won't listen to the mother and they'll dismiss her. But someone who is a true expert will usually have the humility to always listen to the mother and trust that, that they know best. They know their child best.
Mm,
Yeah.
absolutely. And trust the process. I agree. The more seasoned professionals that I interview, it's like the less I can do, the more I can support the mom, the less I can do, the less I can even be seen, the less I can disturb this process, the
Absolutely.
better, because they understand
Yeah.
it's the baby doing so much of the work, it's the mother doing so much of the work. It's
Yeah.
not really them that's doing anything. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Thank you for that, Annabelle. I wanna leave it at that because I just think that
Yeah.
was such a powerful statement and a great way to end
Mm.
this conversation. I'm so glad that we did this. We went
Me
through
too.
so many topics that I think are really important to discuss. If people want to get in touch with you, because you mentioned it's in the intro, but you mentioned that you're a therapist, you do parts work, which is an amazing modality for anyone, but especially mothers, especially families. If they want to get in touch with
Mm.
you, if they want to work with you, if they're curious about what you do, how can they do that?
So my website, which is annabeldeboulay.com, and Instagram, Annabel Du Boulay. And I have a Return to the Rose Garden program, online program, which has 5 different pathways. And one's a membership, which will be opening soon. And the other one, which your listeners might be interested in, is the motherhood program, which will be opening later in the year. Yeah.
Beautiful. So I'm going to link that up in the show notes for anyone who is curious. And I highly recommend checking out the website. It is gorgeous. Just
Oh,
visually,
thank you so
it is
much.
yeah, it is such a work of art. And again, thank you so much for doing this. And I look forward to continuing to connect with you and witnessing how you navigate motherhood at all the different stages. Thank you, Annabelle.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Cindy. And thank you so much for your work and this incredible podcast and for all the wisdom that you're sharing to support other women. So, yeah, deeply honoring you. And thank you for having me.
Oh my goodness. Thank you. Bye, Annabelle.
Bye, Dana.